All right, guys, welcome back to the Better Man Podcast, where we're seeking to become better men. Today's episode, I want to talk about something that I think is a foundational principle, something that is so important for us to have, something that certainly marks a mature man. We know when you see it, when you recognize it within men, it's something that you can just really admire, their ability to, as they possess this, as they hold this trait. So I'm excited for this video. Thanks for being here. So to start out this video, I want to talk about an area, time when I failed in this area. And this was an instance where I was at the grocery store just down the road from my house, and there's an individual walking through the store, and I've seen him in there a couple of times. So he's somebody that I recognized, and he's missing both of his hands, and he has like a prosthetic kind of hook thing. And at one point, he was standing there just kind of looking disheveled, and I was like, oh man, this guy looks like he might need a little bit of help, and I didn't want to just ignore him and just walk by without offering assistance, and he seemed to be struggling. So I just walked up to him, and I just said to him, "Sir, do you need a hand?" That's not a good thing to ask a man that has no hands. And instantly I realized my foot had been put in my mouth. To which the man turned to me and says, "Two, actually," as he held up his prosthetic hook and the other limb. Man, I gotta tell you, I felt like an idiot. I was like, I'm such an idiot. And he didn't even need my help at all. He was just like looking and was trying to find a desirable piece of corn that's what he's after that day. Anyways, that to say, my heart was to help him, but my communication came across pretty poorly. And that's the thing I want to talk about today is communication and words particularly, right? The words that we use, the way we communicate. Man, it's so important that we have our communication skills up to par, that the words that we use are the correct words that are edifying, helpful, building up. And as I was thinking through this, as I was praying through this, the psalm came to my mind where it says, "Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be pleasing to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer." Right? That's Psalm 19, verse 14. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be pleasing to you. Man, how often are my words or the meditations of my heart, or both, not pleasing to the Lord, not helpful, not desirable, and something that he would not be pleased with when I say certain things or do certain things. So something I certainly need to work on and grow in, that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart are pleasing. We see this kind of two separate things, right? The words of my mouth, meditations of my heart. They can be one, they're separate things, but one leads to the other. So what's going on in my heart comes out of my mouth. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. In James 1:26, we read, "If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, he deceives his heart, and this person's religion is worthless." Right, when we're thinking of that my words are acceptable to God, the words that I say are acceptable, here we see that if anyone thinks he's religious and does not bridle his tongue, he deceives his heart, and this person's religion is useless. That kind of just kicked me right in the guts, man. That was a tough one. So as I started studying this, even just dissecting that single verse alone, you start looking at, anybody that studied the Greek would know, taken any kind of Bible study method classes know you need to look at the Greek words, especially when you see repeated words, to see if it's the same word, different words used. And within this verse, the word religion is used twice just in this verse, and it's actually two different meanings. So we'll get into that here. So he says, if anyone thinks he is religious, the first time it's used there is talking about a state of fearing God, right? A state of worshiping God. So if anyone thinks he is God-fearing, anyone thinks he's worshiping God and does not bridle his tongue. If I think I'm fearing God and I don't control my tongue, the word for bridle means to hold back, to restrain, to keep in control. hold in check or restrain, right? And this is speaking about the tongue being held back in control or restrained. It says, but deceives his heart, right? This is a source of self-deception. I think I'm doing right. I think I'm doing all these things correctly, but in fact, I am not. Right? I've deceived my heart, a form of self-deception. And he says this person's religion is worthless. And the religion that he's talking about here is that which consists of ceremonies, that which consists of the outward display of fearing God, right? So, you'd look at church attendance, you'd think of Bible memorization, Bible knowledge, giving. You can think of, there's a number of things you can think of that go with worship, with religion in the form of ceremonies. It's dealing with that which is external. Commenting on this, R. Kent Hughes talks about this in his Bible commentary and his book, Disciplines of a Godly Man. He's talking about this, and he says that James does not mean that those who sometimes fall into this sin have a worthless religion, for all are guilty of this at times. And he says that, but James is saying that anyone that uses their tongue, or anyone that's tongue is habitually unbridled and unchecked, that person, like, even though they're going to church regularly, even though they tithe all the time, even though they have such Bible knowledge, even though they pray all the time, if this person's tongue is not bridled, then their religion is worthless. Right, this is an individual that is out of control. And when I think of a man that's like in control, that's certainly an area that I admire. When you see it in a man, the man that is in control of his tongue, though the circumstances around him are going haywire, everything's just falling apart, but yet they're in control of their tongue. That's such an important aspect. So this verse is dealing with somebody who is out of control, somebody that is not in control of their tongue. They're just out of control. Whatever comes into the mind flies out of the mouth, right? And can often be unhinged, uncaring, unloving, unkind. Anything that I think comes out. This is a person that's out of control. And as a man that's seeking to be a better man, obviously I want to be a man that is in control of my tongue, in control of my emotions. This is the marks. These are marks of a mature man, a mature individual, right? Someone that's in control of all these things, that's not just flying off the handle. As you go through the book of James, James talks about the tongue quite a bit. In chapter 3, he talks about how the tongue is, no man can tame the tongue, right? He talks about all these different things, saying that he gives 3 different analogies from everyday life. He talks about the horses, how they are controlled by bit and bridle. He talks about how a ship is controlled by a small rudder. He talks about how a forest fire is set by just a small spark, a small flame can start a whole forest on fire. And it's interesting when we start thinking about this, when we think about those, the first 2 specifically, right, the horse and the ship, as those are 2 massive things that are brought under control by the one in control, right, the master. So you think of the captain of the boat or the master on the horse, right? There's 2 different instances where a skilled person can make a horse do crazy stuff, right? We can think of all kinds of equestrian Olympic sports where these guys are making horses dance and jump over hurdles and just crazy stuff that masters can do with horses. But then you can also think on the flip side, an unskilled individual riding a horse can very easily lead it off of a cliff and to the demise of both. Likewise, a captain of a ship, right? A skilled captain can traverse the most treacherous of waters and still navigate through them very skillfully, craftfully, and make it to the other side unscathed, boat intact, right? But an unskilled person at the helm is going to run the ship aground and devastation can happen, right? Both of those things can be used in good ways and in bad ways, right? So it's interesting to think through when he gives those 2 analogies of that. Yeah, the words that I'm speaking can be used in good ways to help build up, but also in bad ways, so there's certainly elements where there's times when words are needed, when you need to speak up, when you need to use words to correct, to rebuke, to give instruction. But the words that we need to use need to be careful in those instances. You think of even when Christ was rebuking the Pharisees, the Sadducees, he gave some stern rebukes to those guys, and it was warranted, right? Those guys were in need of that sharp rebuke because they were so self-righteous that it took that to break through. And some of them, you could think of Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea, where it broke through the Pharisaical hard heart, right? Stern words were used to break through in those instances, but Christ obviously carefully crafted his words. But then you can think of when there's, the woman caught in adultery, the woman at the well, so many instances where Christ uses his words to reveal sin, reveal the issue, but does it in a much more gentle way and points them to Christ, points them to forgiveness, right? Points them to the better way. So when we're thinking through this, there's even times when, you can think of lots of instances where, humor is necessary, when you can just add a good joke, a timely joke to break the tension, right? To bring levity to a situation. All these different things, there's time and place for it, and there's certainly masters of words who, like the person riding the horse, like the captain at the helm, masters of their words can, right, navigate through situations, know when to speak, when not to speak, when to crack a joke, when to restrain, when it's time to be serious, when it's not. So as I'm thinking through this, man, there's so many instances and so many men that I can look to that I'm just like, that guy's a master at holding his tongue. When you see somebody that's going through a difficult situation, when you see somebody that's dealing with a difficult person, the way that they carefully craft their words, the way that they carefully speak to them, even just thoughtfully, what are the ramifications of the words that I'm about to speak? It's important that we have this in check. So, and then, and ultimately, we see this, the third analogy that James gives about the forest fire that is set on fire by a small spark. Small words can have great impact and a great effect, just like a small spark can light a whole forest on fire. And James also talks about that the tongue is full of deadly poison, right? And we can think of James doesn't exactly tells us exactly what the deadly poison is, but as we just kind of think through this, and even R. Kent Hughes points this out in his book Disciplines of a Godly Man, that there's many different forms of poison that take place, and I want to talk about three briefly. The first form of poison is certainly gossip, right? When we're gossiping about people, right? Talking about someone behind their back, saying things that I would never say to their face. When I'm carrying tales, when I'm speaking, even if it's true, true or false, these things, but if it's not helping the opinions of others towards that individual, if it's not going to help my character, being somebody that's known as gossiping, right? So there's so many ramifications for gossiping, being someone that carries tales, being one that talks smack behind someone's back, saying things about them that I'd never say to their face. It's important that we don't be those that are gossiping, right? But that's one form of the deadly poison. Another is flattery, right? Which is kind of the flip side of gossip. It's saying something to someone's face that I'd never say behind their back, right? Like I would never, it's like telling an individual, "Oh, you did such a good job, well done, that was awesome, you did so good," and then going home being like, "That was terrible, that was awful," right? Like trying to flatter somebody. That's another form of deadly poison that the tongue can speak, right? Saying to someone's face what I'd never say behind their back. Another form of this deadly poison is disparaging, right? Being someone that's actually tearing down. In James 4, verse 11, he actually says, "Do not speak evil, or do not speak against one another." Not to even speak a word that comes against somebody, that tears somebody down, right? Do not speak evil against one another. Certainly there's times when a rebuke is needed, when there's correction that's needed. That's not what we're talking about, right? Not a correction, but I'm talking against somebody in a form of correction, right? And it's important to understand the difference between correction and speaking evil against somebody. Speaking evil against them is like, you're an idiot, you're doing this and that, and tearing them down, right? But a form of correction is saying, this is something you're doing that's not right. You need to change, you need to stop doing what you're doing, and speaking word to build them up, right? I think it's important that we understand the distinction there, right? Because we're told to speak the truth in love. In Ephesians, it talks about speaking the truth in love, right? Speaking truth that is edifying, speaking truth that builds up. Correction is a way of building up. It needs to be done carefully, right? So James tells us not to speak against one another, not to disparage, not to tear down one another. Right? We see this taking place, and then we can look at the flip side of that. When we're thinking of our words being carefully crafted, not speaking against somebody. James tells us, do not speak evil against one another. Right? James 4:11. In Ephesians 4:29, we read, let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. That word for corruption, right? Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth. That word for corrupt means rotten or putrefied, right? Worthless, does no good, right? Let no corrupt word, let no rotten, putrid word, worthless word proceed out of my mouth. Let nothing flow out of my mouth but what is good for necessary edification, right? The word for edification means to build up, right? To build someone up, that it may impart grace to the hearers. Men. Again, marks of a mature man. When we're thinking of words that are being used, when I think of, when I'm thinking of a man that I admire, it's a man that's careful, that's calculated, right? And you can see that where someone's thinking through what they're going to say. If what they're going to say is going to be beneficial, if what they're going to say is going to be helpful, it's going to build up the person, or if it's going to just tear them down. It's a good trait when you see that, when you recognize that in men, and that's something that obviously I want to grow in, but not letting any corrupt word proceed out of my mouth. When we're thinking through that, it's so important that the words that I say aren't, as I've already said, speaking evil against somebody. It's not tearing somebody down, but is actually building them up. That is helping. I think, there's working in youth ministry, there's many instances where youth kids just need to be corrected. And man, it's easy to just call them out on their stupidity, but to actually help them understand why what they're doing is wrong. So there's certainly some points of application for me in that, right? But speaking words that may produce good fruit, right? That may help, that may cause change, that impart grace to the hearers. That's another important distinction, right? Because even just somebody who is in the audience of what you're saying, not even somebody you're speaking to, but man, it's so easy for us to speak words that aren't imparting grace to anybody that hears, to the person that's intended, to anybody that's hearing these words. It's so easy for us to just use our tongues, use that deadly poison that's in the tongues. And so those are the three that he talks about: gossip, flattery, disparaging, right? And we certainly want to be those that are, kind of annoys me. Let's turn that back to dark mode. Why did you decide to turn on in this moment? Right. Speaking words that are for the building up, right? Words that help, words that impart grace to the hearers. That's important. That's an important thing that anybody, even in the audience of my words, is built up, right? That I'm not tearing somebody down by the words that I'm speaking. Certainly this is an important thing for me to study and think about, even just as I'm starting this venture in podcasting, is the words that I speak here need to be correct, need to be accurate. That way it's building up, that it's not tearing people down, that it's not causing harm. So, yeah, just thinking through this is an important thing. But as we just, want to bring this full circle, I want to land the plane. Earlier I mentioned the verse where it says that, let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight, right? And one certainly leads to the other. The words of my mouth are affected by the meditations of my heart. And Jesus points this out when he's speaking to some Pharisees in Matthew chapter 12, verses 33 and 34. He says, either make the tree good and its fruit good, or make the tree bad and its fruit bad. For a tree is known by its fruit. And he's speaking to the Pharisees. He says, you brood of vipers, how can you speak good when you are evil? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Right, I'm just going to talk about that last, a couple bits here, right? He talks about the fruit. A tree is known by its fruit. I'm known by the things that are seen in my life, right? The fruit is evident. If I've got rotten fruit, that's evidence of a rotten heart. And Jesus says that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So how do I use my words carefully? How do I communicate effectively? It all stems from the heart, right? So if I'm feeding on worldly things, if I'm having a feast of worldly things, and that's constantly what's in my heart, rattling around my mind, then it's going to be no surprise that when those heart checks come up, there's a joke in our household that those are the heart check moments, when you smash your thumb, when you hurt yourself in some way, unintentionally, what comes out of your mouth is a heart check, and I remember an instance where somebody close to me, they were trying to disconnect some vacuum hoses, and one of them was stuck very well, and they were just pulling it apart, and then it came loose, and all of a sudden they smacked themselves right in the face, in the eye, and the next thing that came out of their mouth was a 4-letter word. And I think they were more shocked by the word they said more than the fact that they just smacked themselves in the eye with a vacuum hose. And certainly a learning curve for all of us in that instance, in my younger years. I've gone, man, what's coming into my heart will come out of my mouth eventually. So it's important what I'm feeding. If I'm feeding the flesh, then no surprise that the worldly stuff is going to come out. But if I'm feeding the spirit, if I'm meditating on God's word, if that's what's coming into my life, if that's what's in my mind, that's what I'm meditating on, then those things will start to diminish, right? The fruit will start to be good. I'll start having those fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. All those things will just begin to naturally be produced in my life as I am abiding in the vine, as I'm meditating on Christ, as I'm thinking on Him and His attributes, His character, I'm thinking about Scripture. Those things will naturally start to go away, and the bad fruit will naturally start to go away, and the good fruit will be produced. Even the words that I'm speaking will be those words that are good and helpful, that are proper for building up and not the tearing down. So this is an important aspect for all of us to grow in. Myself, certainly this was a timely study for me, just thinking through this, especially starting this podcast. It's important that my words and my communication is carefully crafted, that I'm not tearing people down, that I'm not saying things that are incorrect, that can lead people astray, but that I'm speaking as accurately as possible on any given topic. So thank you guys for tuning in for this episode. If you enjoyed this, please do comment down if there's any verses that come to mind that you're thinking of when you think of using the tongue. There's lots of proverbs, lots of verses I could have talked about. Maybe leave some comments down below if you think of any, if there's any other deadly poisons or any other ways we can build up. Leave those comments down below. But if you benefit from this, please do share, like, subscribe. You can check out some of our older videos. I don't know if it'll be here or there. You can check out the channel, the videos, like, subscribe, and yeah, share with your friends. So thank you.